So one of our traveling members of this crazy channel is now back from Zurich, and apparently there wasn't any snow in Zurich, but he did go.
No,
But you,
no.
but
It
you
was
did,
actually, it was warm there. It was like a heat wave.
but you did make it to
Yeah,
Iceland,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they have glaciers all the time, right? So that
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. And yeah, there are parts of Switzerland where the snow pack doesn't fully melt. And actually, we went for a hike and we found a couple places in the shadows where there was some snow. And I had a snowball fight with my son, at altitude. And we then, yeah, then when he came down, it was like everything was shirt sleeve and shorts, and they don't have any air conditioning. So fortunately, in the evening, it would cool down enough.
that's
But
good. That's
yeah,
good.
it was really quite hot there. I mean, temperatures, um, high 80s, low 90s. I mean, just yeah, you go
Yeah,
swimming in the lake without any problem. And
yeah,
then the
that is.
transition from there to Iceland, where suddenly it's like, having to wear shoes and socks and long pants and a sweater, hat. um,
We do that in Southern California, just going from Riverside to West
yeah,
LA.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And the biggest excitement that when I was there is they started to have like another kind of eruption, just
Well,
started.
yeah, I was reading
Yeah,
that. Is
yeah.
that because you were there?
Yeah, it wasn't a big deal. It was more of a rift that sort of opened up where it was bubbling along there. And we could kind of get close and see the steam coming out, but we couldn't see any, by the time we got there, already, I think the main event was over with. But it was actually surprisingly close to the airport. It's not where I thought it was. I thought it was
Oh,
much further away because they closed this one village.
yeah.
And you're assuming, oh, that's where it is. And there's no way to get down there. And that village is like really far away from where it is. It's like on the road between Reykjavik and the main airport. Like you're driving along, you can't miss it. It's just right there. People are pulling over, going out, taking pictures, and yeah. So it was pretty close there, but not threatening anything, fortunately. So
Yeah.
planes were flying like basically right overhead. We were sitting there filming it, and you'd hear an airplane like go right over your head, and like, oh, okay.
Well, speaking of things going over our head, you were watching the launch this morning. We've had a lot of
Yep.
activity in the SpaceX realm in the last few
Mm-hmm.
days with plans of rescuing astronauts off of
Mm-hmm.
the space station and other plans of sending some astronauts into deep space. I mean, so
Yeah, yeah, and the couple. I mean, it was sort of interesting. I think it was like when I was still in Zurich, they announced this next flight in December, which is called the From 2.
mhm.
And I'd never heard of the From 2. And then our way back to Iceland, we stopped in Oslo. And while I'm there, it's like they go to the Kon-Tiki Museum, and right next to it is the From Museum, so you can actually go in there and see it. And this was a 19th century sailboat that was used to explore both the Arctic and the Antarctic. And so like Roland Amundsen was on the ship. That's what basically got him down there to be able to be the first person to make it to the South Pole. And that's why this mission coming up in December is named after it, because rather than going around, basically in kind of an equatorial orbit, which is most manned missions are, they have a slight inclination to it, but they basically go around that way. They're going to go in that polar orbit.
Ah,
So it'll be the first time that you have a crewed mission that's
oh,
going over the Arctic regions and
wow,
Antarctic and
wow,
both of it. And that's why the appropriate name is not
yeah, yeah,
Polaris. It's like what you would think
yeah,
it would be,
yeah,
but is actually From 2.
wow,
And I believe one of the astronauts on there is actually from Norway, which is appropriate.
yes, yes,
Yeah, so that's going to be rather interesting because they're going to be they're going to be the first ones to be sort of up where the auroras are and being able to see the auroras from space and explore it. But you don't necessarily want to be there because that's kind of a radiation hazard,
yeah,
because that's why the auroras are being produced. So you have to be very careful about that. And of course, this mission coming up with the Polaris is the same sort of concern that a couple of things are going on. One is that they're going to be flying over the South Atlantic magnetic anomaly, which basically where its magnetic field is so weak at that point that you get a little bit more radiation coming in through there.
mm,
And they also will be at a much higher altitude. And from that, you also will get a higher dose of radiation. But it's actually temporary. What they're going to do is that there's a lot of maneuvers they're going in, and they're going into actually almost the same um, inclination as like the International Space Station launches. So they always launch their crewed missions in a certain kind of inclination to match the inclination of the ISS, and they wait till the planes come in alignment. And that's why they have an instantaneous launch window to be able to do it. Now they're going at the same inclination, but they're not going to be in the same orbital plane. They're going to be off a bit because they don't really need to go to the ISS. And more than likely, they're launching on that one just because they get so much experience launching that, and also your return zones, because I think there's like a 2-day delay on this because of bad weather in the Atlantic for recovery. So they have to be, so it's not just about, is the weather good at the Cape? Is the weather good in a potential splashdown zone if you have to make an emergency landing? So all those things have to be considered. So they're going to be doing that and going into, the first kind of parking orbit, and then they're going to boost up to the higher orbit where they will go further than any crewed mission since Apollo. And probably it might be like the highest that anyone has sort of orbited the Earth. Okay. Apollo didn't orbit that high. They went straight through it on the way to the moon and back. And only the Gemini astronauts were up around that kind of height. I think it was Collins and Young and Cernan. I remember who was also on that. They use like the Agena target vehicles to boost them to higher orbits that were up around like 450 to I think maybe 600 miles or something like that. And this one's going a little bit higher than that. I think maybe, did they say as close as 800 miles or something? So yeah, that's gonna be, and then of course they're gonna have the spacewalk, which is gonna be interesting.
Yeah.
And this just kind of comes down to is like, if one of the problems that Boeing is having is that Boeing is not really a contractor. They're a general contractor. Is really what it comes down to. And a general contractor is basically, he doesn't build your house. He hires all the people that actually do the building of the house. And it seems like Boeing does the same thing. So they don't really own anything. They just kind of figure out how to get everything put together. And the whole thrusters problem they're having is they're blaming it on their subcontractor. It's like, they're the ones that just kind of screwed up. It's like, yeah, well, you're the general contractor. And they only, recollection serves, they haven't built any spacecrafts ever. Not Boeing. I mean, part of them, McDonnell Douglas built like the Gemini and I think Mercury, right? Yeah. But it's only because they got acquired. So while Boeing, was part of the Apollo program, everyone was part of the Apollo program. It's like Grumman built the lunar module. They didn't build the whole thing. Rockwell was responsible for the command module and all that. And IBM was for the avionics, and Rocketdyne for the rockets and stuff like that. Sure. So each company owned part of it. SpaceX owns the whole stack. You look at their rocket and it's like from bottom to top. So Boeing, it's like they're not using their booster. They're using the Atlas booster. Remember the Atlas, you gave a little bit of a problem there because it had that leak in the one of them. So they then, had to recycle before they go ahead and do that. So they don't own the whole thing, but, SpaceX, like they build the engines, they build the boosters, they build the flight control systems, they build the capsules. They build the thrusters as well. I mean, this is something that that Tom kind of talked about as what he's done and from Impulse. He was the one that designed the Merlin engine. He said, "Oh yeah, building the thrusters on that was like one of the easiest things compared to everything else." They own the whole package, okay, right down to also the spacesuits. I mean, that's just unheard of. It's like they're even building their own spacesuits, And so this is what's going to be interesting is that, this is going to be the first time that they're taking, testing out a spacesuit that is qualified for an EVA. So the current spacesuits that Butch and Sunny will need to return, because that's one of the problems. Of course, their blue Boeing spacesuits are not compatible with the SpaceX system. So you have your climate control system and everything else you have to have for it. So it's not compatible with that. So in order for them to come down, they probably could come down without a spacesuit if they needed, but it's just not part of standard procedure. You want to make sure you have it. So that's there in case of like a rapid depressurization or something like that, but it's not really meant to do a spacewalk. And so they've got the ones now that are meant for the spacewalk, and what they're going to have to do is a few things in there. Is that first they have to lower the pressure. So pretty much ever since the Apollo 1 fires, Apollo 1 is, you don't really need nitrogen, right? It's the oxygen you need to survive. And to make things lighter, spacecraft always had like a partial pressure of oxygen that was the same as the partial pressure on normal Earth, and then you wouldn't notice a difference. So
Right.
that was a lot lighter and everything else. And so everything was pure oxygen and about 5 psi, something like that, if I remember right. But the problem with a pure oxygen atmosphere, especially when you're at ground level and it's at full sea level pressure, is flammability. And that was the problem that happened in Apollo 1. They had all these things in there that were considered non-flammable at standard atmosphere.
Yeah.
But when you put in a pure oxygen atmosphere, suddenly they became very flammable. So it's like, ever since then, it's like, no, we're going to have this nitrogen oxygen atmosphere just because, we're worried about fire. And it's only when you get into orbit that you might lower the pressure or do something else. Well, what I have to do is like, well, we got to get rid of the nitrogen, because one of the problems with nitrogen is the bends, right? and so they had to make sure to kind of get that out of the system for a while. So they're going to switch over to a pure oxygen, because they want to make sure the suits don't have full atmospheric pressure. Otherwise, you're like the Michelin Man, like, So they're pressurized suits, but you don't want them fully pressurized, and you want to have enough so you have some sort of mobility and everything. So they had to redesign everything to be able to handle that. And the other thing is there's no airlock. So in the International Space Station, there's an airlock that whoever's doing the EVA goes into. It's basically the double doors that you go through. Right. And then the outer door opens up, the pod bay doors that Hal wouldn't open or close or whatever, So basically one of those that whoever's doing the EVA, they go through there, and everyone else is still in the full atmosphere. But they're doing this from a capsule, and it's been like, it's been a long time since an EVA straight from a capsule like this, back in the Gemini days, and Apollo, they even did it. And that means everyone has to put on a suit, and then you have to get rid of the atmosphere that's in there, and then you open the hatch and you go out. So that's what they're going to be doing, is that, and it looks like 2, and it's not quite clear who the 2 are. We know Jared Isaacman is going to be one. I think Sarah Gillis is the other. That's what I heard, but I've heard speculation it might be Kit Poteet instead, but I think it's going to be Sarah. So they're actually going to go out, and the other 2 are going to be basically in the vacuum of space, and they'll be able to take a look out. Now, they're not going to have the cupola. Because, remember, that's the thing that was famous from Inspiration 4 is like the idea of the cupola.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they're not going to have it, because the reason why they had the cupola is, since we're not going to, in an actual space station, we didn't need the docking port. So they pulled the docking port out and put the cupola in there. When you open up the hatch, whoop, there, and you get to see it. And they can't get the cupola out of the way, because that's what they got to go through. So they're not going to have that. Otherwise there's like some, you'd have to get that out of the way, and it's just going to make things too complicated. So that's what they're going to do. And I think it's on the 3rd or 4th day they're going to do it. And there's going to have a lot of, orbital changes. They're going to go to the high orbit, then they come back to a lower orbit. And then they're going to make sure everything is working all right. They need at least a day or so, I think, to be able to change the atmosphere over to a pure oxygen, and then the recovery. And then when we know more about From 2, that's going to be an interesting watch. Yeah. Because I assume it's going out of the Cape. Because normally polar launches go out of Vandenberg, just because it's set up that way. It's like the only way you can really launch in Vandenberg is south. You don't want to go west. That's the wrong direction to go into orbit. And you can't go east, because then you're going to be dropping your boosters over the middle of the country. So they basically fly south. Now, you can do it from the Cape. The problem is like this political issue of flying over Cuba in order to do that. So, but SpaceX has done that already, and they do this old dogleg maneuver to be able to pull that trick off. Now, I don't know if it's going to be a pure polar orbit. My understanding is going to be a very high inclination. So they may or may not actually go directly over the poles, but they will definitely be flying over the Arctic region.
Right.
And that would kind of make sense. So this will be a bit daring, because you're now talking about an orbital inclination that hasn't really been attempted before, as far as return sites and everything else. So that means there's a lot of mission parameters that have to be looked at and studied very closely on how that works. Usually when coming east to west, you have a lot of these opportunities off the coast of California, which I think SpaceX may be landing down there in the future, because there was something about, the service module. Yeah. So when they drop the service module, or the trunk is coming down intact. So when they land around Florida, I guess some like farmers in Texas are discovering the trunk coming on down. So if they land off the West Coast, that's just going to go in the Pacific, and no one has to worry about it. So that means, yeah, they're going to have to then fly it from the West Coast back for integration of for the next flights. But again, you know, you have all these different locations you'd like to be able to land, and you may lose a couple of those opportunities depending upon weather going in that other orbit there.
Sure.
So yeah, there's some challenges to that they're gonna have to work out. But yeah, we were expecting in the morning, and when I went to bed last night, you know, a lot of people wondering, is there gonna be like a triple header where we're gonna like 3 launches within 2 hours? So I'm gonna do like Polaris dawn and then a Starlink launch out of the Cape, and then a Starlink launch right after that out of Vandenberg. And then, you know, I got up a few times to check it and see like, oh, you know, one of those was kind of scrubbed and stuff like that. And Polaris, I think, was pushed back, not because of the leak, but because of bad weather in this case.
Right.
Just gives them more time to debug everything that's going on there. So they did a Starlink launch this morning. And, you know, I kind of looked at it, and then like right at the very end, it's like, oh, it looks like it landed. I go, oh, wait a minute. Something doesn't quite look right there. And, you know, it fell over, exploded, and then, you know, whoop, end of broadcast. Didn't get to see much of anything else. And so I looked at it a few times to get some, you know, some hot takes on there. And, you know, a lot of people just assumed, oh, it looks like it just tipped over and exploded. And I was gonna say, well, wait a minute. I'm seeing like this big fireball underneath before it tips over. So there's something else that's kind of going on here. And I can share a little bit of that, of a couple of the posts that we had, if that helps for everyone to be able to see it, so we can get an idea. I assume you took a look, right?
Oh, I saw your posts.
Oh, okay. All right. So basically, you know, this post here, while you were sleeping, we end up seeing this. And so what happens is that we see there's a big fireball underneath, and then it starts tipping over. And then, you know, boom, and then we see, of course, the velocity do really weird things here, which is expected from the telemetry is a bit confused. And so you see the explosion really happens, but, you know, there's an explosion at the very end when it finally tips all the way over.
Sure.
So the question is like, oh, what caused that? What's the possibility? I was wondering because I noticed like a lot of green flash, like kind of a green flash right after it landed. That was like, what could that be? Because usually the green means like the TTEB, which is the igniter fluid, has been released or something like that.
Right.
But it could be something else. It could just be that there was some copper or something like that around there that would also kind of give that little greenish hue to something. So it may mean absolutely nothing. So again, I was just kind of wondering about the green flash when you slow that down, whether that could be it. But if we look at it, we can sort of see that, you know, the conflagration, you know, it shuts down perfectly right there. So right now, so we would say like right at this point here, it's kind of shut down, and suddenly it gets all flamey again. And if you look at that, it looks like some kind of liquid is spreading out there and catching fire and everything else. And what's going on? It's like, oh, so there must have been like a fuel leak underneath it, right? And then it combusted, and then it caused the whole thing to fall over.
Sure.
Well, maybe not. Okay. So this one here, I think will be a bit more obvious. So I put an arrow right there, and so I can get it to stop. So right here, we can see what is the rear landing strut. This is the upper strut of the legs that are coming down here. And if you look at it kind of closely, you're going to see, you know, here's this one's fixed. You can see that one moving quite a bit. So you kind of notice that's like, well, wait a minute, it's flailing around. And not only does it move down, but then you'll also start seeing it moving back the other way. So, you know, you just basically think of these as like these toothpicks that are sort of holding the landing legs together here. So they form this nice triangular structure. And something happened. It must have broken off down by the foot somewhere. And with the result of that, it seems like it's free to move around unless this leg broke off right down here at the base. But, you know, there's 2 things here would break off. And that means if it's still stuck, that thing is sliding around in there. And I'm not sure it would slide around that quickly because that's a lot of inertia. So something happened. My suspicion is that when that broke, it caused something to rupture that then caused the flame. So the thing is, it's like, oh, the landing legs broke, it fell over and exploded, right? But then it kind of looked like, well, wait a minute, it looked more like it exploded, then the landing legs broke. And what may have happened is that the landing leg somehow failed, yet it managed to kind of stay up. But then it caused a leak somehow, a rupture in the tank, the stuff comes down, and then it was probably going to fall over anyway. That's my overall feeling. And now why did that break in the first place? And well, first of all, I try to do a little bit of a comparison here of the, it's really hard to see what is it. It's very dark and kind of going in there. So you'd have to clip the scene there, just get an idea of what it looks like, and compared it to the last landing on the same drone ship. So we're talking about the same camera angle and everything. And then the last one where we could see the booster a little better, it's clearly standing up at 90 degrees. But that one, you look at it, it's just like, it's a little bit askant. You're like, it doesn't quite look right. So it already had a little bit of tilt before it decided to go a bit more. And I was trying to grab the image that was like the closest to the landing to be able to do that, to get it. Because if I wait longer in there, it's just like, well, yeah, I was tipping over. Of course, it's going to be an angle. So I wondered how it came down. And then it was kind of pointed out by someone else. They said, well, wait a minute, the speeds are different. And it's like, oh, yeah, I should go ahead and check that. This is the last time, August 14th, landing on a short fall of gravitas. And the landing speed was 2 kilometers per hour. And in this one, it was like 11.
Wow.
Yeah. So it came down maybe a lot faster. Now, the thing is, I don't want to jump to conclusions here, because the telemetry that you had is notoriously bad. Sometimes it's behind. It'd be behind quite a bit. And when you see the split screens, you're going to notice that sometimes the 2 video images don't sync up quite right, because the way they're being transmitted and everything else. And a lot of times what you're seeing here in the telemetry has been filtered through so many stuff. This is not the real telemetry that SpaceX has. This is something that they have for being able to, for broadcast. So, I don't know how much faith you can put in it, but it's possible that it came down a lot hotter. And that means it went from my thinking that, oh, there was probably some mechanical fatigue. This is like the 23rd time this has landed.
Yeah.
And remember, it did, and launched and re-entered.
Right.
And then been picked up and then ridden on a drone ship through heavy seas. And, there's like just a lot of jostling around. And this booster first flew in 2018.
Wow.
So it's been around a bit. It's been put in storage, it's gone vertical, it's gone horizontal, who knows how many times. There's just a lot of fatigue on a lot of the components. So you would not be surprised that something down there just finally, oh, I've had enough. It's just like can of soda, you crush it enough times, eventually something's going to tear open. And that's one possibility, some failure there. And then I thought, well, that explains, it's not like there was an engine anomaly or anything else. It's like you get a leak, you've got stuff that are really hot right there, a lot of hot sources. You get that leak, of course, you're going to get that explosion. So there's probably nothing wrong with it. The engines are fine, all that. But if it came in kind of hot, then that means the problem started sooner. For some reason, it either underperformed coming down, or there was something wrong with the avionics that it kind of missed that. Should but again, I don't want to jump the gun here, because it may be that those numbers we're seeing here are completely meaningless, because it looked normal. It didn't look to me, but again, what's the difference between 11 kilometers per hour and 2 kilometers per hour? It's like, it's hard to tell. So, there may be someone that's able to go to like a real frame by frame of the previous ones, where you kind of sync them up when they're about the same height, and then look at that and see where the one of them really drops down a little bit faster than the other. I mean, that'd be the next kind of forensics to kind of do before you jump to the conclusion. But if that's the case, then the source of the whole problem is it came down too hard.
So these,
and then of course things are going to fail.
But the idea that we would get 23 uses out of these was not ever, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing we don't know is maybe they intentionally brought it down hard.
Oh yeah.
There's always that possibility. They say, look, this thing's got 23 in there.
Yeah.
It's more than paid for itself.
Yeah.
Let's see, it's like, if we lose this one, it's not going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
Let's see how much it can take. Let's see, can we come down? That's a possibility. Right. That and if it is, and it's like, yeah, fine. And that's probably all right, because this should not cause like an FAA investigation or anything else. The only thing I guess where I'd throw water on that argument is that they decided to postpone the Vandenberg launch, which was supposed to be a few hours after this one. to investigate the whole thing to make sure there isn't something
I
systemic,
see.
that they
I
lose
see.
a booster out there as well by something that's, you know, an easy catch or something like that. So
Right.
that would be the only reason I would say, nah, that's not the case.
Yeah.
Definitely not that.
Any update on Starship launch? They're just waiting for
I think it's, I mean, the last or you know, the FAA certification to do it, but at the same time, they're still doing a lot of work out there.
Huh.
You know, they recently added some more struts and doing a bit more in there. So if it was like really ready to launch, then I don't think they would still be doing modifications. And I haven't heard anything to say that it's imminent. You know, it's like it's going to be Labor Day weekend or anything like that.
Right,
It's like
right,
just this weekend. No, and there's no way it's going to be Labor Day weekend, because that's when everyone's going to the beach. I mean, the last thing they want is it's like, what, you're running your Labor Day weekend. So if anything, it would be like maybe the first or second. And I always had the feeling it could slip to mid to late September or something like that because of other things that are going on.
I see.
So
I see.
I'm not surprised. I have not heard anything. It just like, you know, oh, urgency, you know, get it down here right away. So I still think it's a little bit, I think they're still trying to work out some kinks in the tower.
Well, we started this conversation in Zurich. We've come to Texas and California and Florida. Now it's time to go to China. So
okay, but before we do it, just to finish on that, remember there was an article yesterday in the New York Post regarding the you know, basically the engineers at Boeing.
Yeah.
Just proudly talking about how how much they hate SpaceX and how much they just always talk them down.
Yeah.
That, you know, it's just like that seems to be their focus. And that's the root of the problem. It's the absolute root of the problem. And I can tell you this a little bit from experience. When I did a summer internship in 1980 for an engineering company. And when I was there, all I heard, like with the engineers, is they were always talking down Boeing in 1980. In 1980, Boeing was like at the top of the game. That was like the firm that everyone wanted to work for because it was a great engineering firm.
Right.
And it kind of struck me strange. It's like, what is this obsession that they all have about it? Yeah, you know, they lost some contracts to Boeing and stuff like that. And they would just go on and, you know, about all sorts of reasons why they're better. What's Boeing? And it's like, that's telling me that Boeing must be doing something right, because they're always bad mouthing Boeing and they're not bad mouthing any of these other aerospace firms.
I see.
So that was my indication, you know, the first indication. And that, you know, while there's a certain amount of boosting you've got to do within your company to make sure, you know, everyone like believes in the product, the mission and everything else. Right. At some point you can take it so far that you create these blind spots that like, oh, we're so much better. You know, SpaceX doesn't know what they're doing. Like, what a bunch of idiots. They've never done that. And it's like, you know what, boy, you've never built a capsule either. You've never put people in space. I mean, everyone thinks, you know, it's like you can build airplanes, but you've never gone into space before. You never. So you're also newbies at this. And even whatever aerospace pedigree you have going back to Apollo, they all retired a long time ago. Yeah. So it's not like you're drawing from that. And you know, the people that you are drawing the experience from that built capsules is McDonnell Douglas, right? You know, and which we all know is the problem. But this goes a little bit further. Is really struck me very crazy when I've gone to Kennedy Space Center, and I've done a lot of tours there, and you know, also stayed at the hotel there and stuff like that. And the thing about Kennedy is that if you don't work, you know, people that live around there, if you don't work for one of the space companies around there, most likely your spouse does, or your significant other, right? Your boyfriend or your girlfriend or something like that. They all know it. That's it. You know, it's like either you're supporting it one way or the other. And you see that there are two crowds of people. There's the people who work for SpaceX and the people who don't. And the people that don't are constantly bad mouthing SpaceX as well. And it's ridiculous, the arguments I keep on hearing from them. And that, you know, you get this tour from the tour guide who's going along, you can tell they're clenching their teeth when they have to talk about SpaceX. And then when they're not like officially on tape or something like that, talk to them, they go, oh, you know, SpaceX, like, you know, just like they did all this bad stuff. And then they're talking about that, you know, they did something that, you know, is you know, my girlfriend works for the wildlife department. And they were talking about how SpaceX is like doing this to the alligator. You know, it's like, what? You know, it's like there's no, and then they go on about something else. And they have a nickname for them. They call them ScrubX. Oh yeah, they're always scrubbing. And I'm like, really? It's like, you know what? The only way you can have lots of scrubs is if you have lots of launch attempts. If you're not having any launch attempts, yeah, you have 0 scrubs, and you can be really proud of, like, look, we got a big 0 up there as far as the number of scrubs. Like, yeah, look how many launches you have. And it goes on and on. They say, oh yeah, and they really work them hard. They make them work weekends, and they're launching on holidays, and it's like, that's what you got to do. If you want to go to space and do something like that, yes. I mean, police officers, people that work in fire departments,
plastics manufacturers.
Yeah, they're people. Guess what?
Companies.
They don't have 9-to-5 jobs either. And if you want to work in this industry, that's part of the job description. And that's why you're not getting anywhere. And so I'm just looking at this incredible jealousy that's coming out of everyone because of the success of SpaceX.
Yeah.
And because they're so obsessed about that, they don't see their own failings. They believe that they're so much better. It's like, well, if you're so much better, why the hell haven't you launched yet?
Yeah.
Why haven't you been able to successfully do it? It's because you're obsessed about them rather than looking internally. You look at yourself in the mirror. That is your problem. It's not SpaceX. And the fact that they are just getting so obsessed about it tells me that they've lost their way. And when I read that article, I was like, yep, that it completely dovetails what I was seeing. Again, it's like, remember checking in a hotel and telling me, oh yeah, my boyfriend works for such and such aerospace company. Oh, we don't think that much about space. Well, good for you. Okay, but the fact people are staying at the hotel is because they're coming to see the SpaceX launches, not to see your company XYZ launches that aren't happening. So yeah, so enough of that rant, and if we want, we can move on to the robotic space.
So there's so there'll be lots and lots of people that will be ranting and raving about how horrible Optimus is too, but they've already started, of course. And over the weekend we saw headlines that Tesla basically didn't show up for the China robot show.
Well, they were required to. There's absolutely no requirement. Was Figure there? No, I don't think it was Zeptronics there.
Actually, Tesla was there, but I guess they just had
they just sent an Optikin. They didn't even. Yeah, they sent.
Yeah,
they sent what is like because they know this thing's just got to get scanned and copied and something like that. And so they weren't showing anything more. They're not going to show the real deal. They're going to show something which may or may not be dimensionally correct or not, or pretty close. And then they have no obligation to go to that show.
Yeah.
And neither do any of the others. And Elon has been very clear that they've given almost too much information because they just get copied.
Right.
And so they decided not to. And we saw a lot of bots there, and they had really, interesting demos and stuff like that. They're all kind of cute, but nothing there that I would say was revolutionary.
Okay.
So a lot of them were demos. We don't know how much of them were hard coded. That's always the nature of any of these trade fairs you go through. People show their best stuff.
Sure.
And some stuff they show, I think, also is fluff and is really not of a whole lot of substance. So you had companies there that had produced a lot of bots, and they're Hobbit bots. They're a lot smaller, so they're easy to mass produce. And some of them almost look like a copy of Atlas, which I'm not sure that it necessarily was like they literally copied them, or that it's like it's almost like a net. If you're going to sit down and try to design one, there's a good chance you would have come up with something very similar to Atlas. I don't know that they would have been making many changes to it, because the shoulders were all the same and everything else, and they're all just able to show off that they're able to have a wide range of motion on the shoulder, stuff like that. So they could put the arm out like this straight and then just rotate the shoulder around there. You see the hand, and it's like, oh, very good. You're showing me exactly where the polar singularity is of the shoulder, which is something you don't necessarily want to have, because that's going, that can cause motion problems and everything else. So they're showing that their robots have a wider range of motion than a human being. And it's like, okay, so what? But I think a properly designed one should not only have the identical one, but the motors and actuators, there's no need to have that capability. It's like you're over engineering. You're giving it a requirement it doesn't need to have.
Yes.
And again, I think this kind of comes down to, like, when you're designing something, make sure you keep your eye on the prize. That, what is it that you really need to have? What are the capabilities? And don't over engineer it. Don't add in things until you need it and until you have the experience and capability. One of the problems with the Starliner is they tried to add more features and functions than they really, really needed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go back to the EVs. Remember everyone being able to do the tank turn?
Yeah.
And the crab walk, stuff like that?
Right.
maybe you should have been focusing on manufacturing at scale, range,
cost down,
reliable, get your cost down. I mean, it's like all these things. And the whole thing was like, they just said, well, everyone's going to assume we have the same functionality as Tesla, but now we've got this one little deluxe thing that no one really needs, and turns out doesn't work. Because remember, Rivian took the tank turn out when they discovered that there was tipping problems, and it doesn't work on pavement. It only works on a muddy field, and all these other little things. So again, this is an example of like sometimes putting in functionality you don't need to be in there. It's like, keep your eye on what needs to be there and do something. So there's a lot of this wow factor. It was like, oh, look how double jointed their robots are. I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Just show me one that's actually able to do tasks. Not to say that there haven't been, some interesting stuff that's going on there, but there was nothing that kind of broke away from the field as far as I could tell. Now, one of the kind of leaders is Fourier Intelligence, which also about 2 years ago was like one of the first Chinese robot companies saw that was able to walk, and they walk pretty well, not as fast as Unitree, but still pretty good. They've announced their second generation, which is not a surprise, but through CGI. So we haven't really seen the real thing, seen parts of it, and they now have a hand. I think before there really wasn't a hand that was appreciable to do anything. So they have one now, 5-fingered hand, but 2 knuckles. So it's kind of going, the original Tesla approach, take away one of the knuckles, but it does seem to be able to do that. So it's like a 15-degree of freedom hand with not quite the same flexibility in the fingers. So we see they're going that way. You can see there's some movement in the neck, swappable battery pack, and couldn't really see much more. I mean, they showed a little bit of what the legs and everything else kind of look like, but no specs. We have no idea the size of the battery pack, the walking speed and everything else. But I'm pretty sure they're going to come up with something because they've already built hardware. And they've already learned a lot of the experiences of what was wrong with the hardware they had and how to be able to improve it. So I'm sure they're going to come up with something that's interesting. And this is probably just a reveal of what's going to be coming. And maybe it wasn't quite ready for this trade fair. And I think the other thing that's interesting is like, bringing it back to North America is Peter Diamandis had an hour-long interview with Brett Adcock of Figure. I don't know if you listened to that one.
I did not see that yet. No.
It's actually it's very good. You should listen to it because you find out a few things. One of them is that Figure is able to build their Gen 2 bot at a rate of like 1 a week right now, with expectation to soon be able to do 2 a week. So that means they're going to get reasonable production volume. So you do the math on that. That's like 100 a year. But they're getting ready to ramp up. They're getting 104. They're going to get ready to ramp up production because they're going to do more and more internally. And Brett gives you kind of the overview of what's going on, and it's very well thought out and everything else, and what they want to do in the business. They're doing the one that every startup has to do, that every startup is really bad at, and that is knowing when to say no. How many customers do you bring on board to realize the limits of capability, define exactly what are the companies are going to bring value to you as far as the functionality, and focusing on that and doing well on that, and trying to execute it as best you can. So in many cases, you've got to let a lot of your customers go. But if you don't do that, you're going to drown in all these customers and not be able to. So they're doing that. We got a couple more things that the original Figure demos that we're seeing were done in Sunnyvale. So they duplicated parts of the line from BMW and did it where the engineers are to get it up and running. And then they went to Spartanburg, and I think they were there for a week or something like that to demonstrate that it worked there. And then BMW was very happy with it, and that's the next step. But the other thing I think is rather interesting is Peter Diamandis let something slip that I have already predicted, on Herbert's show is I had predicted a long time ago that there would be a Figure 2 bot and the Figure 3 and a Figure 4, all the way up to Figure 8 and maybe beyond that. And it's not because I have a crystal ball or I'm really good at predicting anything. It's because all these companies are iterating, and at some point they're going to come up with another generation.
Right.
What I can't predict is when that's going to be. It's like I had a feeling it coming about every year there's going to be another one.
Sure.
And it's just because they're all doing it. They're all going to be innovating. They're all going to be coming up with something else. And that he's already seen the drawings for Figure 3. And that it's really going to be interesting and radically different. And Brett wouldn't say very much on that because he's not supposed to. He's probably a bit surprised. It's like, yeah, when you came over and we showed it to you, I think we were on NDA. And so, so it's like, literally it's like, if I had seen one of those things, I could not confirm or deny whether I had seen,
Right.
particularly, but now it's like, we know one exists. We know nothing about it. And I'm not surprised because as I 2 weeks ago in Herbert, I said, I predict there'll be a figure 3 and a figure 4.
And
because it just makes sense.
You can do the same thing with Optimus and say there's going to be an Optimus.
Yeah. And there was a little bit, and we knew there was going to be a Gen 3. You just didn't know when the Gen 3 was. Sure. As soon as Elon talked about the 22 gauge Freedom Hand and how that was, I mean, I said, okay, they're going right to a Gen 3. There's clearly going to be a lot of things, and he sort of confirmed it. Then a couple of weeks later at the shareholder meeting that they're going to go ahead and do it, and we now know it's going to be at the end of the year, and that they'll make a production version of it, and there'll probably be a Gen 4 version by 2025, which is the one they're going to be selling to customers. It kind of indicated that, they're going to go through that, work out all the kinks, and figure out what the next thing is going to be. And then because the other thing is that Brett talked about is that the hand they have is their 4th generation hand. So we've got 2 generations of the figure bought, but they've already gone through 4 generations of hand. And I'm not surprised at that. Because there's a lot of different components. You've probably got more than 2 or 3 generations in the overall thing that you've been working on. So that's and there's just other things about it. And one of the things that Brett also posted something about the danger of companies being overcapitalized.
Oh yeah.
And that's that their raise was they wanted to raise $500 million and they ended up raising 675 because they were just oversubscribed, and they could have gone more. They probably could have raised $1 billion if they wanted, but it's more or less like, we don't want that, because the problem is that if you get overcapitalized, a lot of times you don't stay lean. You start making it, and he was just talking about, it's like, as soon as these things happen, everyone says, oh, we got to hire the C-suite now. He's like, you fill out your C-suite. Well, C-suites don't like having only one person, report to them. They need a staff of 30 below them, so they feel important. So they hire those, and the next thing you know, you get this bloat. He's like, none of that's going to happen here. And it's like, that is really good advice. Is that when you're in a startup phase, you want to remain as a startup phase. Yeah. And this is advantages that Tesla had and still kind of has, is that they remember what is it like to always be near bankruptcy.
Right.
They did not have the benefit of when they did their IPO of raising like tons and tons of money that they could just sit fat for a long time. They had to spend that really well, really good capital efficiency, and that all the other companies that came after them, you thought, Tesla's a tailblazer. They just made it easier for them. It made it worse for them because all of them had these huge IPOs, and as soon as they get those huge IPOs, they're like, we're done. There's nothing we have to do. And then they start hiring the C-suite, and then they start having like these ridiculous benefit packages for their employees that just show, they're not really thinking about how they're going to be spending and using that capital allocation efficiently.
There's actually been studies that show what you're talking about.
Yes. Yes, absolutely, and you can believe that, and so that's something that Brett posted like about a week ago, and I think it's a good. You read that and you go, okay, so he's got the right point of view of what he's doing. That it's hard work. You want to stay in that startup phase. It's gonna be a long time before you can really start thinking about that. You can take your foot off the accelerator, and that's the kind of attitude. And I think that's what you got to look at when you start looking at companies that are going to be good investments or not, is how does the leadership team approach things? Right. Are they rational about things? Do they have a really good mindset? And then people will be able to judge for themselves. Listen to the talk that he had with Peter Diamandis, just to get an idea of their Figure's approach and Brett's approach to starting up companies, what they're trying to do. And the other thing I should say is that, we a few weeks ago when Figure 2 came out, there's a lot of bravado coming from Brett, about, the best one in the world, stuff like that. And everyone was just like, is that really the case? And like I said, look, he's going to be a little bit of a salesman, a little bit of a showsman when we put that thing in. But in the talk with Peter, he's very like, it's like, nothing but good things to say about the Tesla team and how competitive it is and everything that's there, still feeling they have like a world-class. And that's the term I would use. It's like, I wouldn't say they're the best in the world. I'd say, but they're world class. Yeah. Okay. It'll be for other people to decide whether they're the best or not. Right. And that's how it kind of comes across as well, in that, basically throws a lot of praise over towards Tesla. He owns 3 Teslas, you know, stuff like that. So I would say there's a friendly competition between them, and an understanding that, you know, the market is so big that there's no need for everyone to be doing what Boeing is, right? You know, Boeing is like just constantly obsessed about SpaceX, and figures like, yeah, we respect the Tesla team. They respect us. We're not obsessing about one another. We're just trying to do the best we can.
That's right.
And that's how it looks.
Yep. That's right. That's my philosophy. I can assure you, I've even written it in books. Your competition can sometimes be, you know, I mean, I can remember many times when my competitor was my best friend in the trade. And I can remember when my competitor was my biggest enemy, but that was usually because they chose to make it that way. And in many cases, I mean, you've got to be studying what your competition is doing, because you know, they maybe come up with good innovations, and if you're not aware of what's going on, you're going to lose out of the market. So you always have to do a competitive analysis, but it should never be from the standpoint of that. You've got to be neutral. You've got to be aware of your own blind spots, and you've got to kind of look at what they're doing and say, is that a good idea or a bad idea? But making sure you're not somehow stuck in your way. You might say, oh, wow, you know, they've innovated. We really need to consider that. But if you take the approach that, oh, they're a bunch of idiots, they don't know what we're doing, we're the best, you're going to fail, and you're going to fail every time. And the main thing is, you know, be confident in what you're doing and work at it. And then when you get the data that says you're taking the wrong approach, either internally or externally, then you've got to kind of shift your directions and go ahead and do that. And again, this is the thing I've said, is that the best ally of any restaurant are their competitors. They're not competitors. They're colleagues. That if you want your restaurant to do well, you want to be downtown in the restaurant district, right?
Because that's where everyone goes to eat, right?
And you want all the rest of everybody else.
You don't want to have your restaurant in the middle of nowhere where no one shows up, you know. And your competitors don't mind that, because the fact that people are coming downtown to see your restaurant means they're going to notice their restaurant the next time they come down. You know, they work together. So they're not trying to put one another out of business. If anything, they want to actually say, hey, you know, we want to know that, you know, that's the best place to set up shop. And so it's the same thing with the humanoid bots, is that the more of them that are out there, the more they legitimize the entire industry.
And we know that you're also extremely well known for the fact that you are innovative with regard to your mini discs, with your mini Starlink dishes. And yesterday, totally underreported, totally not being made a fuss about. I've been making a fuss about it for 2 days, well, for 24 hours on X and everywhere else I can think about it. But the fact that Elon Musk has opened up the Starlink emergency services to every phone. I mean, it's going to, I guess it hasn't actually been turned on yet.
Yes. I think part of it was he had to get some sort of FCC approval to do that. And the FCC was like, thumbs up on that.
Yes. And then now you have to get approvals with different countries. Right. But the idea of opening it up for free, so that anywhere in the world, somebody that is in a situation where they're, you know,
are we surprised every time there's a natural disaster anywhere in the world, suddenly free Starlinks are being sent there to be able to get that. So, I mean, that's just a way to prove, because it's important. Why should you let, you know, profit or something like that stand in the way of people's lives? Okay. Right. You know, you worry about paying the bills later. The main thing is to save the lives. And now you get this capability, and why not do it? And the only thing that's really holding it back is the FCC. So a lot of people have asked, it's like, well, first of all, even if your phone service has been disconnected, if you have a cell phone and you have an emergency, you can dial 911. Yes. Now, there's a question whether the 911 is going to work, because evidently there's lots of 911 outages these days. But the thing is, you can do it even if your plan has been cut off. So that's number one. Number two, it doesn't matter the carrier or anything like that. So the idea is that it doesn't matter the phone. It doesn't matter whether it's T-Mobile or something like that. They may have some capability. So for the most part, the latest phones that anyone has that's bought the past couple of years probably has the capability. The thing is, there may be different bands in different countries to be able to make sure it works. Because, you know, we found out that, you know, the iPhones that you buy here and bring over to Europe don't necessarily work, because they'll have a different spectrum on some of the 5G. So there'll be little things like that. But assuming the big ears up there that are listening in are able to deal with any sort of a spectrum that you're using
Mhm.
should work. And you don't need a big antenna on your phone. So the idea is that they're putting up these satellites, these direct to cell satellites that have really big ears on them. Okay. I call them, like, you know, the Dumbo satellites. And these aren't the final ones. The final ones are still waiting for Starship to be able to, so they'll be much, much bigger. So they're super sensitive, and that they can pick up a cell phone broadcast. Now, your cell phone, for the most part, is trying to find the lowest power connection it can find. So it's constantly searching for these connections, and it's trying to find the best one. And it will always, like, say, oh, if I can't, it looks for one thing, and if it can't find it, it's going to look for something else, and it bounces around. And if you're in the middle of nowhere, it's going to attempt to find a cell tower, and when it can't, it's going to try again and again. Now, this turns out to be one of the reasons you have to put your phone into flight mode on the airplane.
Oh,
it has nothing to do with interrupting the communication of the pilot, or it's not going to cause the plane to crash. Absolutely not. The problem is these phones are constantly trying to connect to these towers, and they can't find them, and they broadcast a way too powerful bandwidth, and they're way on up there, and they're coming down. They saturate the whole area. They mess up basically the connections at the ground level, not so much with the pilot. And this will happen. I mean, so if you take your phone and you put it like in a little Faraday cage and put it on there, it's just going to be going crazy. And then you'll pick it up afterwards. It's like,
wow.
You wonder why. It's because, you know, the battery is just going crazy trying to broadcast, and it's like, no, not getting a signal. Keep trying. So in the middle of nowhere, it will boost the signal to be that it can be picked up by the satellite. So it's sensitive. And of course, the satellite's then going to have to probably a pretty strong beam for you to be able to pick it up. Now, I don't know that it's going to be interesting. I don't know enough about it. I have to talk to some people that are experts on it, and whether when it's over this broad area and then broadcasting down on the cell service level, whether it knows to narrow that beam to where it picked it up from, whether it's got enough information on that, or whether just like blanketing the whole area. But that doesn't matter. I mean, those are the technical details of what's going on. It clearly knows that, like with your Starlink Mini. When that's going on, it knows which cell you're kind of coming out of.
Sure.
And then it will only broadcast to that particular cell.
Sure.
Now, another thing that's come up that's interesting is that it looks like, I think Starlink made an application, or they got like some sort of approval from the FCC. I think DirecTV and others were trying to lower the power requirements, or say that, and then the FCC just looked at it and said, there's nothing backing it up. And that the transmission, they're broadcasting at a really low power, and they might be able to increase it by a factor of 8.
Wow.
Yeah. And when they do that, then that's just like, it opens up the bandwidth a lot. So that means, not only will you have, higher data rates going up and down, but you may be able to have more in a particular area. So that could really change the game as far as the availability of Starship or Starlink to terrestrial. But the main thing is that you now are talking about having 911 coverage anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Absolutely incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. I know that we're all hungry for more information about Optimus, but I suspect that
there wasn't much. It was like
Elon
I was hoping there'd be some, because you noticed how Tesla and Figure get a little bit competitive there when the Figure 2 bot came out. That suddenly it's like, Elon came out and said a few things about it, and they were going on, they're sparring back and forth. He said updates to come soon. I'm like, oh, okay. But there haven't been any updates, and it may be because they've decided, well, we don't really want to reveal those updates yet. Maybe they're going to wait.
Yeah. Okay, Scott, thanks as always for coming on, and to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.